There was a rush to declare Hillary Clinton dead after Iowa. There was a rush to coronate Barack Obama just before New Hampshire. And there is now a rush to blame the polls or the pollsters or the poll participants, with accusations flying of shoddy methodology, racism, even conspiracy. Our fourth story on the countdown, not that the polls, including the in-house ones for Senators Clinton and Obama, did not get the result wrong, but there is one overlooked fact. Remembering the magic number, Obama got 36% of the vote in New Hampshire last night. Now look at these pre-primary poll numbers. Fox News Opinion Dynamics poll, Obama 32%. New York Times CBS poll, Obama 35%. Rasmussen Reports poll, Obama 37%. WNBC Marist College poll, Obama 36%. Right on the nose. Obviously, you can respond, yeah, the pollsters did great. The only thing they got wrong was Clinton's total and the winner. However, a few other inconvenient polling truths. That New York Times poll suggested 9% of Democrats were undecided and 28% said they might still change their minds. Don't know in the Fox poll, 12%. Marist poll, 23% of Obama's supporters, 30% of Edwards' supporters, not firmly committed. I think those are the answers right there. I'm joined now by our own Craig Crawford, also, of course, of CQPolitics.com. Craig, good evening.
Good job of laying out the numbers there.
Thank you, sir, and thanks for suggesting it. Even if the exit polls suggested Obama and Clinton split the late deciders, is the poll disaster as monumental as it seemed at first blush last night? Is this not all within the various kind of adding up margins of error?
I tend to think, Keith, that the disaster was in the reporting of the polls and in the interpretation of the polls and in the polls themselves. The problem we always have, and it's understandable, we want to do the bright line numbers, who's ahead, who's behind. We don't want to get into the margins of errors. We don't want to get into the undecided numbers. We don't want to get inside the polls and look at some of these issues that you just laid out. And it's forgotten. It's overlooked in the reporting. And I think what happened here is in Iowa, we saw a big turnout for Obama of a lot of voters that pollsters had not expected to see, and so they thought that might happen again here in New Hampshire, and that led to a conclusion not only by pollsters but by those of us reporting and interpreting them that we'd see a repetition of that, and it didn't happen.
The suggestion, the first sort of hip suggestion here was that the polls were wrong 100% or nearly thus because of race. That in Iowa people had to go out and vote in public, that they had to, do the politically correct thing. But in New Hampshire, statistically anyway, 1 out of 6 could say whatever they wanted to the pollsters and then go into the voting booth and not vote for an African American. Two problems with that. One, the polls were very close, as we indicated, on Obama's number, and the other part, lying or chickening out or whatever in New Hampshire, it didn't happen at all in Iowa, but it happened to a degree of like 14 or 15% in New Hampshire. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, in the modern era, I've always had trouble with this theory that, let's say someone's a racist, and a pollster calls them, and they decide, well, I'm going to say I support Barack Obama because I'm a racist, and I'm really going to vote for someone else when I get to the polling place. I just can't believe a lot of people go through that. But what I do believe is that when people are asked, would you vote for an African-American candidate, or would you vote for a woman, there's some inflation in that number. People might say what they don't really and truly believe. Another thing I would compare New Hampshire to, Keith, is Deval Patrick, the African-American governor who was elected just last year. His polling numbers going into the voting booth were almost exactly on target with what he got in the actual vote, right there in neighboring Massachusetts, arguably more of a racial cauldron than New Hampshire is. So people are going to believe what they want to believe, that racism played a factor in these polling miscues. I'm just saying, you got to believe that in an evidence-free zone,
or at least in a zone which you say, well, it may have happened, but we have no way of suggesting that it was decisive or to that percentage degree. The worst of these polls, and again, we're operating in a vacuum in terms of the percentages. They actually had the numbers, were those internals. As Tim Russert revealed last night, the Obama poll had him up by 14. The Clinton poll had her down by 11. Would there be a particular reason the politicians, the official, the professional polls got it so wildly wrong?
I think a lot of them were also making that same assumption I was talking about with Iowa. You know, going into Iowa, a lot of us didn't believe these numbers that the Des Moines Register had showing all these independent voters and even some Republicans going to vote for Obama. That did happen. And so I think even inside the campaigns, the Clinton campaign was totally shocked by that result in Iowa and feared that it was about to happen again in New Hampshire. I think one thing we saw, because this is a new era in terms of the calendar, everyone assumed that such a short period of time between Iowa and New Hampshire meant that the Iowa bump would be that much stronger, that there wasn't time for New Hampshire residents to think about this and to step back and make their own choice. I think in the end they actually did. Maybe that's because the news cycles these days are so compressed that you get just as much information and back and forth in 5 days in the modern era as you did 20 years ago in 2 or 3 weeks, which used to be the spread between Iowa and New Hampshire.
Well, I mean, good, because the voters should be ahead of the media, not the other way around. They usually are. They used to be all the time.
I'm for
that. There's one theory on paper ballots versus the Diebold optical scanning stuff, that Obama won the areas using paper ballots and Clinton won the areas using machines. Problem there numerically is Clinton's percentage on the paper ballots was still 35%, which was still way above what the polls showed she was going to get throughout the state. So anyway, wrap this up. Why did the polls pick the wrong winner? What is the principal reason?
I think pollsters gave Obama an Iowa bump in New Hampshire, and the voters of New Hampshire did not. One of the problems I see with this argument that's been made, that racism was behind Clinton's victory, is I see people supporting Obama, not the Obama campaign, but others, setting up an argument going into South Carolina, where you have a majority of African-American voters, to say to those voters, oh, Clinton only won in New Hampshire because of racism, and to actually goose up the vote for Obama. That's what I fear is happening here, and I think that would be a perversion of the facts.
Yeah, boy, I hope that's not the case either. Craig Crawford of CQPolitics.com. As Gerald Ford said, I don't believe the polls consider themselves dominated by the Soviet Union. Thank you, Craig.
Thanks.
For those